Welcome to the meta season episode. I don't even know what I call it now. 35. Let's call it 35. After season 35. After GAC, the GAC season 35. So welcome back. What is the show? We look at the state of the competitive GAC meta once a season, in between the end of one, beginning of another. Basically, my thoughts on what's going on, what's going to go on, what has gone on, what's popular, datacron, teams, units, ships, etc. wise. Just in general, the meta. What's popular, what's rising in popularity, what's going down, and why. And this is not just for Kyber 1, for instance, although a lot of probably a third half of the content I watch is Kyber 1. But it's for players who are competitive in any league, just that myself, in terms of what's available to view and what I look at a lot is Kyber 1. Doesn't mean only Kyber 1 players are competitive though. Who am I? Why should you care what I say? Well, besides having an awesome black background to my notepad now, I'm not sure this is good or bad. Anyway, that's minor. Who am I? I'm like an 11 million GP player, play in the top 10 to top 100 of GAC. I really enjoy it more so. Right now I don't believe there's a reason to be like to aim for number one. There's not a real motivation besides, of course, pride. Pride's important, and the sense of accomplishment. Is that how it goes? But there's a lot of awesome players in the top 100, top 200, top 500. And it's interesting how it changes from 20 to 30 to 50 to 90 or something. Anyway, that's where I play myself. More importantly for the show, I watch a huge amount of GAC fights. Yeah, probably 10,000 a season, at least, depending on who posts their fights and who's streaming and how much time I have, because I generally don't watch a lot of streaming fights, mostly YouTube stuff, since my time is sort of unscheduled. So, unschedulable, perhaps is a better way to say. So welcome back again, since this is the second time I've done the show after a hiatus of a few months because of busy things in my life. I'll see how I do to continue every month, which I would like to do. I think it's a good, for me at least, a good rhythm. And I have a different way of taking notes and preparing for the show now, so it's not a lot of work right before. I sort of do it throughout the month. So yeah, thanks. I've got a lot of good feedback in DMs and some on the YouTube video here. I always appreciate that, and allows me to adjust a little bit my approach and make sure that I'm doing stuff that's useful. So there's 4 areas that I cover in the show: 3v3, 5v5, ships, and like overall game state. All of those relating to GAC, of course. This is only about GAC. Tangentially, it may be related to other game modes that impact GAC, but the focus is on GAC. Yeah, blah blah. Nothing special here. One thing, game state currently, it's mostly the Rise of Empire, territory battle, Rise of the Empire. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but that's the main game state type of thing that's happening currently that affects GAC. So now that, oh wait, I forgot to start. By the way, I always watch a video in the background here, and we're watching something whose volume I didn't mute. Oops, sorry, Cass. Anyway, this is TassNX, one of my favorite content creators, I guess, to watch. He has a lot of interesting fights, does a lot of interesting plays. Yeah, cool. It's unfortunately he doesn't have timestamps in most of his videos, so I don't really, I fast forward a lot or the little scroll wheel to see when the next fight's coming up. But very, very good fights in there, lots to learn. So anyway, back to the meta. What's going on or what happened rather, in 3v3, the last season, season 34, which was DC5 and DC6. Surprising myself a little bit was the sort of like lack of impact by datacrons, to be honest. I mean, some datacrons had an impact, Afra, the most important one, and Hondo to some extent also. But besides that, the 20% TM one, yeah, it definitely had an effect in some fights where, you can't outspeed Dark Revan, sort of, unless you have your one for your troopers, for instance, if you're using that. Or, Emperor Palpatine, Mara Jade, and a third, Darth Vader or something. It was very powerful with the 20% TM, but also very counterable, like with Hux or something. But anyway, the point being that the impact of Datacrons minus a few level 9s is pretty small, to be honest. Not non-existent, but there's very few of them that made you think, oh, well, I just can't beat that team. There's a lot that impacted the fights on a lower level, like the stats were amazing, health, protection, etc. Especially like in the later parts of the season once people built up their Datacrons. But in general, I didn't see a lot of Datacron impact in most of the 3v3 season, which was interesting to me. I think it's a combination of both the previous set 5 and the current set 6 that didn't have a lot of like overpowered level 9s, more or less. I mean, some are still good. Grand Inquisitors are great, level 9, but mostly on offense, to be honest. It's really easy to beat on defense by like tons of different Padme teams, which is such a budget trade. So I think that's a good place to be for the meta. Sort of especially in 3v3 where when a team isn't beatable, like Lord Vader last 3v3 season, or not isn't beatable, but it's complicated to beat him. It's not very fun. Where I really enjoyed this 3v3 season. There's lots of cool things to try, lots of interesting little combos, but nothing that was like just felt like the thing to have or the thing to do. It was pretty cool. Besides Afra, her Datacron is amazing, and she's a great team. Sort of easy to beat with Han and Chewie and some leader, especially if you had a level 6 where when a scoundrel does a basic to get 100% TM, which for Han, obviously, he gets to take 2 turns. That was really great and sort of easy to kill her, but that's the only one. And yeah, overall, Afra had the highest hold rate out of any team in the entire game, almost 50%, 48, 48.9 or 48, 49. Anyway, almost 50%. And then you have like Bastilla, JML Watt, which has been around for a year. You don't really ever see in Kyber, but in lower divisions, when people only have 1 or 2 GLs, especially they don't have like Sith Eternal Emperor, and even you have to sort of know how to play that team. You have to use basic before ult for a while. Anyway, that's a very popular team with a very high hold rate. Not as high as Afra, but in the 40s. Putting that aside, Ray-Ban Hermit Yoda, which has no Datacron at all for their team. Like there's no Scoundrel, there's no droid. That was the 3rd highest hold rate, which is, it's cool. I mean, in general, in the top 10 strongest defensive teams, none of them had a level 9 besides Afra. Well, SLK was in there once, I think. What did I write? Yeah, SLK was in there once. And Savage was, I think, in 2. Yeah, he was in 2 of the top teams. Neither one of them with C or something else. One was a Darth Revan team and one was a Starkiller team. And there's no real Omicrons that specifically affect him. I mean, yeah, the stats give him more health and protection and stuff, and it's great, but and defense. But even without protection and defense, like you'd still have to beat him the same way. You use a bounty hunter team, or you use Bad Batch, or depending on the Savage setup. Like there's budget ways to do it, but most people don't know the budget ways or didn't look on GG and missed out and gave him a huge hold rate. And very few Datacrons that are making impact in those top teams. Let's see. On offense, yeah, very similar. SLK is very popular on offense, and obviously he has 2 potential Datacrons from set 5. So no surprise to see them there. He's always been a strong offensive GL. I look back on some of the previous 3v3 seasons, and it didn't really change much. There's always a couple of SLK options in the top 10 offensive teams. But I think personally that's a great place to be balance wise, and especially for 3v3 where it's a lot more complicated for most people because things aren't, I don't know, you don't have a 3v3 territory war. So people don't practice as much arena. It's not 3v3. It's hard to practice there. So there's a lot more experimenting from folks generally. And it's nice that there's not like one GL that has a datacron that's just crushing everybody's hopes and dreams, in my opinion. So that's enough about 3v3. So what's going to happen in 5v5? A lot of what I have written below here, and in general, in case you, I don't know if you noticed, but while I do sort of read my notes, I more know what I'm going to say and I reference to them every now and then. So what you read and what you hear me say are frequently, well, perhaps aligned, quite different. So in 5v5, holy draft-lating bananas. I think it's going to be crazy, especially now that people have built up their Datacron stash storage availability, and there's a lot more understanding from going through a couple of territory wars, how they actually work and how they can be played with in arena as well. Mainly, I mean, yes, Hondo and Afra are still going to be great, and mostly Afra, I think, less so than Hondo. Although Hondo has an interesting place he fits a lot more so than, I think Hondo in 5v5 is going to be used in more places, but not quite as strong as, maybe on defense, I mean, but not quite as strong as on offense. We'll see how it goes. But Afra is still going to be great on defense, depending on, I'm curious the teams people use with Afra in 5v5. Obviously, you put her with her droids, that's great, but that's pretty vulnerable to just being CLS or, hand chewy plus some stuff. But as soon as you make her a little beefier, or give her a good datacron with some beef instead of offense, and then you put 1 or even 2 pretons in the way, that's a lot more difficult to slow her down in the first move. There's going to be a lot of mess with Afra, I believe. I will mention quite a few of like the smaller little weird, strange, whatever interactions with datacrons on I make an enormous, it's just an Excel spreadsheet I keep, and then I paste it into the Discord once a week when GAC is active. So I'll do that with some of those small little notes, but in general, I think it's mostly going to be about probably Afra, IPD, and I mean, you'll see some stuff with like Candy or Candrass, maybe even with Droideka and some weird teams. But I think it's mostly going to be IPD since you can protect him a lot more in 5v5 teams. Make it not as easy to avoid killing him. Or to save him until some of the units died so that he actually has more of an effect on the revive. Although just as 100% offense from IPD is pretty crazy. But mostly I think it's going to be about the 20% TM. Because most people will have a few or a lot of those depending on their luck. But the part even more than the TM, I think, which is interesting, is going to be the stat calculation because it's the weakest light side or dark side member who gets the 20% TM for each other dark side ally on the team. So it can be a light side person that gets this TM, but they have to have the least amount of health and protection. So some teams that's easy, like for troopers, Dark Troopers is virtually always going to get it because his health and protection are quartered, and he gets those 4 stacks, and each one has a quarter of his stats. So that's pretty easy. But for almost all the other teams, you have to make sure that the unit you want to get the 20% or 40 or 60 or whatever, or 80 depending on your team, TM actually has the appropriate stat. And then even more than that, you have to make sure that the cron that you're using, if it has health or protection, that you have calculated it correctly. So it, because the health and protection will give a different, it's a percentage of value, it's not a flat thing. So it gives a different percentage based on the unit. Obviously, that's nothing special, but the calculations are sort of complicated if you give stats with your Datacron in addition to just the 20% TM. So in some regards, it's easier to just leave the 20% TM at a level 3, not roll other stats. Of course, sometimes you really want some level 9s that have the 20% TM, so it's not as easy as that, but it's going to cause some problems, I think, for quite a few people. Like oops types of problems. Should sort of be fun to watch it. All of this here about level 5 and 6 impacting each other. This is all from last time. Pretty much what I expected. Like SLKR could kill a bunch of the Lord Vader comps just because Lord Vader with his protection up, easy for SLKR to dispel. It was like simple, childishly easy. But I mean, better than that was using like Fennec with the level 3, where whenever a debuff is dispelled, she gets tenacity and potency up, and she could stack her damage so quickly versus Lord Vader. That's also even in 5v5 very possible. I just don't think there'll be a lot of Lord Vaders on defense, or maybe people put Lord Vader with IPD or Lord Vader with Canderous or something like that. Because Canderous can go first and then trigger Maul, and also does some armor shred and gets protected. There's some possibility there. So it will be interesting to see what happens with Lord Vader, but I think in most Lord Vader comps, you will see Fennec destroying it relatively easily with a good level 5. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I think they're generally different. You'll see a lot of level 5 or set 5 on defense, and you'll continue to see a lot of set 6 on offense, with probably the exception of Afra. Dr. Afra. A relative of Dr. Octopus. No, Dr. Afra is what I meant. So, the ships meta. I wrote here last time that ships was boring. That holy ships, that is not the case now. Wow. Scythe added a little bit of spice to the mix, you could say. But with TIE Defender, I mean, they changed it a bit, but it's still very good. Damn. TIE Defender is amazing. Totally changes up the meta. Well, I don't want to say totally changes up. That may be a bit of an exaggeration, but it dramatically changes what you can do and sort of how the balance works, especially for players who like to place their Profundity and Executor on defense. So basically, if you're not familiar with what Scythe and Defender do, using the two of them, you basically get a new Empire fleet, and you can still keep the other Empire fleet with like Gauntlet and TIE Advanced, TIE Bomber, TIE Interceptor, etc. You can still keep that separate and use an Executrix. Okay, he's taking a coffee break. Let's fast forward to some fights. You can still use Executrix with Scythe, Imperial TIE Fighter, TIE Defender, obviously, and you can take out Executor quite easily. Pretty decent banners, too. In some comps, you have to use, like, the Plo Koon's ship. Some you don't. It depends. There's a few different varieties going around there now. I'm sure once more people get Defender to 7 stars and play with it a bit more, we'll see more and more options. But basically, you can kill anything. You can kill Profundity with it as well. So it really changes up. Like, we have 3 solid kill anything offensive fleets at this time. The only sort of question in terms of, I'm saying everybody has everything top of the top. The only question is really, how can you make, or how could you theoretically make Executrix and TIE Defender work well on defense? To me, that's a big question. That's the main unknown. Because Profundity and Executor now, like, I don't know, most of the GAC from last season was like all the TW guilds placed them both on defense. and then they can like flail at each other for shit banners, um, or they come up with somebody who just keeps them both for offense plus whatever another fleet, and they're going those type of defenses are easy to out banner. Um, so I think in GAC you see it a lot, but it's not a good strategy to put them both on defense if you're going for banners. If you're assuming your opponent doesn't know how to beat those two fleets with whatever they have, then yeah, that's a great strategy if you think that's the case. But still, it's very interesting to think of for the defensive players, the ones who place Profundity and Executor on defense already. They'll probably save Executrix plus TIE Defender on offense. But then what happens to the third fleet? Like, what is the third fleet? Is it a Malevolence? Well, you can still... Malevolence is more complicated, like if you use Plo Koon or something like that with your Executrix Defender fleet to take out Executor, then you have somewhat more of a problem when it comes to beating Malevolence with Negotiator. And if you're using your other Empire fleet versus Profundity, then you have somewhat more of a problem to take out Malevolence as well. So I think Malevolence is a potential for sort of a wild card type of situation. But I expect that people will keep it for offense and put like Profundity and Executor, and like Radis or something on defense, which is like I think one of the worst defenses you can do against a player who is going to play for like win rate versus for hold rate, defensive hold rate. But there's a lot of questions, a lot of different ways to approach it now. I think it's pretty cool. And we'll see, maybe they change Defender even more, but right now Defender hits like a truck. Very impressive. So then we have a little bit low those three fleets. That's sort of like 3.5 fleets or 4 fleets. Let's say call it 3 fleets. Then you have the other Empire fleet down below with Malevolence Negotiator. And what are they going to do exactly? I mean, both are great offensive options. One for good banners, one for terrible banners, or really bad banners, maybe not terrible, but a high win rate against non-top tier fleets. So I think for most people, they have sort of like 2 questions to ask themselves, how well do you know the offensive options? Because all these offensive options I'm talking about in fleet, I would say most of the people in the top 100, actually maybe that's not true. Half the people in the top 100 are confident executing the fleet offensive options. But as soon as a player does something that's not in TW, a lot of that confidence goes away. And so that's when it becomes really interesting. Like, what can you do to make it different than TW? Because for fleet especially, that's what most people get experience in. So how well do you know your offensive options, especially depending on what your gear, relic, pilot, everything levels are? And then do you feel lucky, Punk? Yeah, that's not really accurate. People complain about fleet being RNG when in reality it's not RNG. It's just the ability for you to control what happens is based on pilot, relic and mods, but the gear level, let's call it the gear level of the pilot. And the problem is that almost all like fleet videos, tests, etc. Many creators are getting better more recently, but almost all of them, they post stuff with no mention of gear relic levels, or they mention theirs and not their opponents or something, or they mention the relic levels, but they don't show the ship speeds, which is frankly the most important thing. So it's very hard for people to like see a video, they go and do it themselves, and the turn order is totally out of whack. Especially with many of the top fleets now, like the top maximum speed is actually designed very carefully. There's like 8 ships within 4 or 5 speed of each other. So depending on what gear level your pilot is, you either go first or second, or it's a 50-50 flip or something like that. And that's a really important part of uh, determining what counter you can use is the relative gear level of your fleet versus their fleet. And there's not that really many videos and stuff like that that go into detail about that. So I think that's going to be a sticking point with this meta in determining what you want to do, because you have to know what's possible with your relic levels versus your opponent's relic levels. So every opponent's different. It's going to be interesting. Yeah, so this is all just going over what I was just talking about. Basically, ship meta is not stale any longer, in my opinion. There's a lot more interesting decisions to be made. The TIE Defender is a huge bonus to players of all levels. For sure, everybody will get him at 4 or 5 stars. And if you save ship energy, or you bought a few packs, or you just refreshed a lot of ship energy, I think for something like 5,000 or 6,000 crystals, which is not a lot, but in terms of dollar value, it's like, I guess that's like 30 or 30 bucks or something. You get a 7-star TIE Defender, which you can fit in with your existing Empire fleet and beat. I mean, you'll have to make little tweaks and test and whatever and beat any other fleet. That's pretty amazing. Huge change in the ship meta. Game state meta. So, yeah, the Rise of the Empire TV, it wasn't as, I mentioned it before, I think, in the 3D section. It wasn't as much as I expected, to be honest. I really thought that some of the characters that people really got they would play with in GAC, but I barely saw it. Sort of sad. From an entertainment perspective, it's sad. But I mean, people will do what they gotta do to win. I am curious in 5v5, but I'm not so hopeful because in 5v5 there's a lot less flexibility. Like, yeah, you can switch out a character here and there, but in general, there's a team comp that works, and you know it works, and you tested it or theory crafted it in some rare cases, and you really, this is what it's going to be. And not a lot of the strange characters that you may have been forced to relic up for TB, excuse me, are going to play a role in that. So we'll see. But what I am very interested in is what's going to happen with the next Datacron set. That's a little bit related to Rise of the Empire, more of like game progression in general, because we know that they generally tend to release Datacrons around a theme for like recently released or upcoming characters. You know, Jabba and Hondo, Afra, etc., etc. So we know we have Trench coming up. We have Ninth Sister coming up, although Ninth Sister will be active during set 6 for the top end players. So I think they do another Inquisitorius friendly Datacron set. Maybe, but not really. And they've had Dark Side basics the last 2 times, level 3s, Dark Side level 3s. So I'm more thinking that it's likely that we'll have a light side level 3 in the future, because there's also a lot of evidence pointing towards, besides Trench from a separatist side, which is Dark Side, and we've had Dark Side, as I mentioned, the last 2. There might be a General Leia coming. By the way, Gerbil, his videos are awesome, especially his ones around, he does some good GAC videos too, but especially his ones around like game theory. He did a video for a while, like what's happening in the Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes universe. Really great stuff, very entertaining and educational too, awesome. Anyway, a lot of evidence, not just from him, but from others, like General Leia or Organa or something, may be coming up next. And along with that, probably some of the marquees. So we can probably say that Leia will be a rebel, but would they do a Datacron with a rebel faction? They've already had that. And they've never repeated factions so far. They could, of course, start now. But Leia also may not be just a rebel. Maybe she's a rebel and like a rebel fighter, for instance. And rebel fighter is a big tag. There's like 15 or 16, 16, yeah, 16 units. We had some interaction with Ewoks. We could have some Ewok marquees, 2 Ewok marquees, maybe. That'd be cool. We could have 2 Ewok teams. I wouldn't be surprised if we had like Ewok separatists, maybe Bail as a rebel. There could even be a new tag for Leia. Although there's a bunch of like rebel fighters, Rogue One, etc. I would be sort of surprised at a new tag. But who knows? It's very possible. From a balanced perspective, maybe it's required. So I think Rebel is a potential faction. Ewoks could be a potential faction. Separatists could be as well. Well, I don't know if they'd have a dark side, another dark side faction. We've had dark side for set 5, and then we had dark side and 2 mixed for set 6. So I would be thinking 1 light side, 1 mixed, or maybe 2 light side, 1 dark side, or something like that for the next Datacron set. And Uhu, or unaligned Force users, to me, that seems like a sort of an easy win. That's like a good mixed faction, you know? There's a bunch of characters. You could give it to a GL if you wanted, or you could give it to like Starkiller or Ben. You know, there's some powerful characters you could give a little punch up that aren't necessarily on their own the most amazing character. Starkiller is pretty great. Anyway, some interesting potential there. And it makes me think too about what characters I want to relic for Rise of the Empire. You know, what's valuable or what may be useful. Lots of food for thought, I think. And also, yeah, maybe that's not even coming up this next set. Maybe this next set is something totally different, and set 8 is for General Leia. I'm calling her General Leia. I don't know if that's actually what she'll be. I think that's what the gerbil said. Talk about Afra. Look, in 3v3, Afra's beating Lord Vader. Admittedly, Lord Vader doesn't, is not like amazing, but still, it's Lord Vader. Afra's amazing. So, we'll see what happens to the next DC set. I hope it's light side. I hope it's Ufu. That'd be cool. There's a bird outside my window. He's watching me for a moment. Move away. Wrapping it up. Wrap it up. Just two, I said few, but there's 2 concepts that I want to talk about. Number 1 is I don't think the concept of chasing the meta exists any longer. Traditionally in this game, you would chase the meta by like saving, spending, saving, right? Something would happen, a new character, a GL, whatever release, or get a rework. That was so rare earlier in the game. And bam, okay, this is where you want to spend all your resources to get the next best hot thing, you know? This sort of stopped when GAC came around, although not entirely, because you still got crystals from Arena, so there's value in chasing the best Arena team. But it definitely stopped when you had crystals move to Arena, or to GAC and out of Arena. And then it like extra definitely stopped when Datacrons came around, where to be powerful in GAC is much less around having the best at everything, and to be powerful in GAC is to making the most use out of Datacrons. Again, doesn't mean having all the Datacrons, or spending $100 a month or whatever it is on Datacrons. Just means making the most out of what you have, because they're a puzzle, a very time-consuming, complicated puzzle with lots of variety and options, but it's still a puzzle. If you figure out, you can do a lot with little. Like I know, and by the way, hi Free. I know a number of people, Free being one of them, who is in Kyber 1 with missing, I think 3 in particular is missing Jabba and Afra. But there's other players without Rey and Jabba, some players without Lord Vader. Yeah, I think some players without Lord Vader and Jabba. Um, and if you're in Kaiba 1, you're getting basically maximum-ish. You know, the end of month and season rewards is higher if you're higher in Kaiba 1, but just in general in Kaiba 1, you're getting the maximum crystals. So it's much more about this concept of planning your spending or like planned expenditures rather than save and splurge. It sort of sounds a little dirty. Or hoard and splurge, as I put it in my text. Because basically, if you spend a certain amount on datacrons, the 50 refreshes, for instance, you know, and that in that case, it's less about spending the refreshes; it's more about spending your time because it's very time consuming in the game now if you want to keep up, which is what sort of sucks. Like a lot of stuff that you could just sim and save people a lot of time. Anyway, it's more about having a routine amount of planned keeping up with the Joneses, sort of. And again, not like a top 10 guild level, but you need a certain amount of datacrons to give yourself the options to be flexible and creative. And then, you know, you're not saving as much to splurge on the most recent characters, but it's not far off if you have good GAC results. You know, if you go 5-4 every season, which you sort of need to do if you want to keep up with the squish, you know, where you go 6-3 and 3-6 or whatever the case may be, you'll get pretty good rewards, crystal-wise, that allow you still to hoard better than going, you know, and dropping down into a Rhodium, for instance, or Kyber 3 or Kyber 4 or something, and keeping a static record around there and getting income from that. Like it's better to spend a little on plan, you know, like expect to spend a little crystals on datacrons, not money, just crystals on datacrons so that you can maintain a higher position. And of course you have to know how to be creative with these datacrons. But yeah, I could talk about this for hours. It's more like financial theory and game design together rather than what's going on right now. Because all this assumes that you like GAC and TW and that the rewards are worth it. GAC is worth it in a way because of the crystals. TW gives you some crystals. Yeah, it has R9 materials, which is important now, but the TW game design is terrible. Like that could be so much more interesting. The whole just 20 banners thing, the very stale, bigger than GAC thankfully, but sort of stale map. Short duration. Yeah, I really don't like the TW design in general. I like fighting, but the time requirement from the organization perspective, not being able to edit stuff, lots of things can be done to make TW more interesting for more players, I think, and make the rewards more attractive, or have like participation rewards as well as winning and losing rewards, you know, sort of like you have in GAC, you get a bunch of credits for each battle. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. So I think the concept though is don't worry about chasing the meta. I think it's more valuable to keep a certain level of datacrons so you can use what you have. You don't have the last GL or the last like super great characters, no big deal. You can still keep a very good crystal income, have fun in GAC, beat a bunch of people. Yeah, don't stress too much about the latest characters. Datacrons actually made this a lot easier than the whole like hoard and splurge, hoard and spend. I forgot what I wrote down. Yeah, anyway, something to think about. The second thing I wanted to mention is a fascinating, so turn meter is obviously a huge part of this game, combat-wise, and how you use that, and on your team, the other team, when it happens, what benefits there are to it, what stops it, what, you know, mastery gain from Rey, and buffs, debuffs, shock versus fear versus stagger, like whatever. There's a bunch of stuff there. But there's only 2 characters in the entire game. Characters, not ships. I don't know if he does it too, but Jedi Master Kenobi and Hux that stop TM gain from the opponent's team, or JMK does it for the entire team on both sides. And in this 5v5 meta, where there's going to be so many of these 20% TM Datacrons, these 2 characters are going to make or break, I think, a lot of matches. So just think about that when you go into fights, like where are you going to use your Hux and where are you going to use your JMK. I think Afra is a big part of that. And if you're using either one of those on Afra, there's a lot of considerations there in terms of damage output, etc., etc. How many tanks there are, free taunt or not, or whatever. But it's interesting that there's only 2 characters in the game to do it. There's some other things like, if Lumi has her Omicron and there's protection over time, I think it is, that gives a character immunity to TM manipulation. I don't recall if Trench's kit, Trench's kit does give that some way, but again, that's like self team, just like Padme's team. Padme can be on any team, light side, dark side, doesn't matter. And no unit on that team can have their TM manipulated. Very interesting. But for stopping the enemy team from gaining or losing TM or something, it's only Hux and JMK. So something to think about in this upcoming Fight 5. And that's all. Damn, I was trying to be slower, or faster, but I ended up at 42 minutes. I hope you enjoyed the show, whether you listened to it, watched it, some combination thereof. As always, enjoy your feedback if you have any. And I'll talk to you next month or on Discord, I'm sure. Cheers, good luck with your prep, and thanks for watching, listening, etc. Have a good GAC.